In just a few hours, Australia's Labor leader Anthony Albanese will be sworn in as Australia's 31st Prime Minister. The win marks the end of almost a decade of Conservative rule. And to discuss now what this means for New Zealand's relations with Australia, I'm joined by Auckland University's Professor of Politics and Public Policy, Jennifer Curtin. Jennifer, thank you for being with us this morning.
Morena.
Must have been a fascinating weekend for you to watch.
Yes, it was.
A third of Aussies, as we were speaking with our correspondent earlier, didn't vote for Labor or the Liberals. What does this say about how divided Australia is politically?
Oh, I think it's not so much divided. It's more a shifting of the political landscape where we see neither of the major parties appealing on some really significant issues like climate change. I mean, Australia voters have been waiting some time for some movement towards a more progressive approach to climate change. But cost of living and some local issues really mattered across different states. So we saw teal independence, we saw rural and regional independence, we saw small parties from outback Queensland get back in. So this is a mishmash state by state. But overall, both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party took a hit to their primary vote.
What do we know about turning, towards our relationship with Australia then? What do we know about the relationship between our two foreign ministers, who is going to be the foreign minister now in Australia?
So Senator Penny Wong is really experienced in the foreign affairs portfolio. So she's been the shadow minister for some time. When we listened to her debate with Marise Payne, the former foreign affairs minister, at their press club debate last week, we know that she's very keen on seeing Indigenous issues raised to a higher profile. They're going to appoint an Indigenous ambassador in the foreign affairs portfolio. She's very keen on addressing issues around China. This is important. And she talked about the South China Sea, but also looking into the Pacific and sort of doing, I suppose, some kind of Pacific reset. She talked a lot about the Pacific family, and one would imagine that's an opportunity for New Zealand to really start engaging and assisting Australia in that space. So
it does seem like a lot of the views are actually going to become more aligned with the government here at the moment. But what about issues like the 501s? Because I know Albanese has said there will not be any change to that. Is there room for negotiation, do you think? Was that just a pre-election statement? Yeah, so I think what we have to remember is Labor really, and the now Prime Minister, chose to make themselves a very small target during the campaign, and homeland security and border security and deportations was part of that small target. Let's not look too progressive on this. But I don't think we're going to see a lot of shift on the 501s in the near future. The thing we have to remember about the deportation approach is that this is not a New Zealand-specific policy, and really where the challenges and where you could get some movement is that this is about ministerial discretion, and that ministerial discretion on who to deport was boosted under the Conservatives in Australia. Maybe that's where the Labor might decide to get it to be a bit softer on that, but we wouldn't see any legislative change. Right. Interesting. Yeah. So keep pushing that one, but good luck. Yeah. Now, in April, Dr. Shane Reti, from the National Party, of course, but he did make some comments about Albanese's policy, or Labor's policy in Australia, about targeting overseas nurses, which he mentioned would have a detrimental effect on our workforce here. Do you think those comments or that policy is going to negatively affect New Zealand?
Well, I think this is part of a broader reopening of borders, getting more workers in. We're seeing that we need to do it here. But also we know that Albanese promised a real injection of funds into the health sector and into the aged care sector. And we know that he's also really interested in seeing the minimum wage rise by at least 5%, so speaking to your previous point, because they've seen quite a lot of wage stagflation there. So I think the challenge for New Zealand will be to sort of try and make sure that we look as lucrative as Australia, but otherwise, yeah, we've seen our people, our professionals move across the Tasman before. We'll probably start seeing it again.
So when we talk about the pay deal with psychologists that we just mentioned, and we're seeing a brain drain already, this could become a point of tension potentially between the two countries?
Well, it's it's Australian domestic policy what they do with their wage rate. So I wouldn't see it as a point of tension. It's just going to be how Australia is dealing with their cost of living crisis, and they have one too. And what we do with ours, and how public sector workers, but also private sector workers, are remunerated.
Public policy expert Jennifer Curtin from the University of Auckland. Appreciate you coming into the studio this morning.
Kia ora.
Thanks very much.
Interesting that, isn't it? Actually, Jennifer, do you think, because Jacinda Ardern in her first call with Albanese didn't mention the 501s, do you think she should have brought it up?
Oh, it's a little bit soon, I think. Things could change on this if they choose to move to be a bit more progressive. More broadly, they are looking to deal with issues around asylum seekers. They might want to look a little bit more progressive on that than, say, the Morrison government. So maybe, but she wouldn't be doing it straight away.
Won't be holding my breath on that one.
No.
Jennifer.